was Kenneth Richard King. I was born in Corowa in 1927. On the 18th of March 1927. I was only two hours over, I believe, and the doctor said to my mother, Millie called him Patrick, he's only 2 hours over, but I finished up getting Kenneth Richard. So I've lived there most of my life. I enjoyed my young days. Schooling wasn't a great problem for me, which I regretted a little bit later on. But I got a job, first job at 14, at 7 shillings a week, and from there I worked there for 4 years before I was called up in the army in 1945, of course. In March 1945 I turned 18, and in April began my army career in Melbourne, where we got uniforms and so forth at Royal Park. And then my first encounter with the army was at Corowa, and for 6 weeks our first lot of training was taken forth there. And then we had a bit of leave and then come back and went to Bathurst for another period of that time. But during that time the war ended, and it meant that things changed completely, of course, and we were sent back to Watsonia in Melbourne, and there for a while, and then time passed on and we were back to Bandiana, close to Albury, which I was very pleased about because I was only 3/4 of an hour away from home and so forth, and there they called for, and we were there waiting to be discharged, and then they called for volunteers to go in the British Commonwealth Occupation Force, and to go to Japan. So, knowing, you form quite a great lot of mates and so forth, and my boss, who wasn't a well person, the civic boss I worked for 4 years, and he wasn't well, and he got me on the phone one day, and he said, look, all you got to do is write a short note, and he said, and the doctor has told me that you'll get discharged straight away because I'm not a well person. So, knowing I didn't know what to do. I just done mates, and I hadn't been out of the likes of Corowa, and that's all my life. I hadn't travelled much, so my brother-in-law, who was an ambulance officer, he seen I was a bit worried, and he said, "Do you really want to go to Japan?" And I said, "I would love to go to Japan." So he said, "Don't bother writing the letter." So I didn't write the letter. And then, of course, we had to leave Sydney in March to go to Japan on the ship called Manoora. It took 14 days to get there. We stopped at Haven for just a half day. We weren't allowed off the boat, but it took 14 days to get to Japan. We were the second boat to enter Japan. Their first boat was in February 46. Was from the islands, they took a boatload there. And of course, I'd like to tell you a story about my first night on that boat in the Manoora. We left about dusk, 1400 hours from Sydney, and we were called down to have to the dinner around about 6 or a bit later, and the waves start bounding up. Well, you've got no idea. We're just going from one side of the ship to the other, and it was a ship that held something like 2,000 personnel, and it was just thrown around like a rag doll. And I grabbed a piece of bread. I said, "I'm not staying here," so I climbed back into my bunk upstairs and stayed there till the next day, And the fellas that got something to eat didn't have it for long. I'm sure you were that. The ship was in a mess the next day. Pleased I didn't have to clean that up. But anyway, things calmed down, and we had quite a good trip to Japan after that, you know. And of course, when we got to Japan, we didn't know what to expect, you know. We didn't know just how, you know, the reaction we did get. And I think that with the two bombs that landed, one in Hiroshima and the other in Nagasaki, and we were treated pretty well. When I say treated pretty, I think they were still in shock of the two bombs that fell. When you think about 170,000 Japanese were killed in both those bombs, we stayed at a place called Kaitaichi, where our first billet was there, and it was only about 7 or 8 kilometres or 10 kilometres away from Hiroshima, and to see the devastation there was unbelievable, of course. Hardly a thing standing and that sort of thing. And I can see it as was only yesterday. I can still picture that view. But and then we were moved closer to Corowa and Hero, and our billets were better and so forth. Particularly the first boat that went over from the islands. They had a battle because it was pretty cold weather when they struck, and nothing was organised for them. And when we arrived, things were better, and so because I was sent to Bandiana, which was a workshop in near Albury. They put me amongst a small unit, but the light aid detachment attached to the A-field battery, and that meant that we had to maintain their guns and their vehicles and what have you and so forth, and there was only about a dozen of us in this small unit. So mateship was a wonderful occasion there, you know. Because I was interested in sport, I was lucky enough to make the football team and the cricket team and the tennis team. So, you know, I wasn't treated too badly. Time passed on, and you know, so after 13 months, I had the opportunity to come home. You know, we visited different places in Japan. I never got to Tokyo, which I was disappointed. But, you know, a lot of fellas either didn't either, but it'd been worthwhile just having a look at that as well. But, so I got home to Australia, had a couple of operations. I had an operation in my hand, but I had a lump there and tonsils out and so forth. I thought, well, I might as well get what they ask you, how you feel and so forth. So got that done as well, and came home, and then I was discharged in September, I think, in 1947. So anyway, I went back to work and worked for this particular person for another 6 years. It was 4 years before I went away, and 6 years. And I felt that had enough education in the clothing business to, when I say we only had a population of our town of about 6,000 people, and boys' wear weren't very well kept for, yet this was a menswear specialist I was working for. And I thought, well, a shop come available, and my parents risked their home, put that on, you know, to give me a start and so forth. Anyway, we battled. I got married that same year, and then 3 beautiful daughters arrived, one after the other, and then a son. And so it was, that first 3 or 4 years wasn't easy, but it was educational, and I was told by a very good friend who was in business, much older than I was, and he said, Ken, he said, look, he said, the population in Corowa is not big enough for just boys' wear, you know. So I gave that a bit of thought. And then we had travellers used to come around every month or so, you know. And a traveller from, I think it was Patterson, Reed and Bruce, I think, came around and said to me, Ken, he said, get into girls' wear. He said, Mum will spend 13 and twopence on the girl and 6 and 8pence on the boy out of the pound. And that was pretty right. And then the third one was a Jewish man used to come around every year. And of course he had a pocket full of cash. And he'd want to buy your new stock, good stock, and he only give you half your money for it, you know. But if you're really desperate, well, you took the few pound to keep you going. And he said, son, he said, get into jeans. He said, that's the market. So that was the change in our business. We were able to buy a bigger shop on good terms. We went into jeans, of course, which was the big deal. But then schoolwear, they asked us to do something in schoolwear, and we did schools around the district as well. And my wife was a great worker. She was the mainstay, really. I was the front person. She could work all night, you know, but by 10 o'clock I had enough. But she could work on books and so forth and so on. So, you know, we worked out, and we worked 10, 12 or 14 hours a day. But, you know, when you get on top of something after and making a success of your business, you just don't worry about sleep very much, you know. So we went through that, and our children will come along, and as they grew up, we put in more men's wear and girls' wear, and in the 1960s we started in 53, and by 1965 or so we were general store almost, you know. So hard work, perseverance and so forth, and help from your parents, you know, you got through. So all that, and now here I am at this age, and look back on life and think to myself how grateful I am for what I've had, you know, and my children, and, you know, my family have been my mainstay, and they have been wonderful to me, and particularly since my wife passed on in 2019 after 63 years. Maureen Curran, her name was, and she had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, I think, or something, yeah. And she worked, she went to Melbourne from out of a place called Rand, out of Corowa, the district out there in the farming district, worked in there, and then came back and worked in New Zealand Loan, and that's where we met, and yeah. So it was a great journey, and I'm very thankful and grateful to everything that's happened to me. I'm very, yeah. My children have been wonderful, and to think now that I've besides my 4 children, who I love dearly, I've got 18 grandchildren, and now we've got 14 great-grandchildren. We've got 2 more on the way, so Solomon in all his glory couldn't be any happier than what I am. I think our son shaped us what we're going to do. He was the youngest of the family, and he came to Brisbane to work just for a holiday for 2 months, and he's been here for 34 years. So, and Maureen, my wife, well, she missed him terribly. So instead of us doing a few world trips, we came to Brisbane twice a year or what. So we're quite familiar with the place, really, and he's become a successful builder and so forth. So we're very pleased about that, and So that's the thing I think probably we missed out on a little bit of travel. I'd like to have gone to the UK and I'd like to, go a little bit more, but I think I should be satisfied with life, really. Yeah, I think yeah. Japan itself, a few of our mates, my mates went back like 10 or 15 years after, and they said, you've got no idea the change. How Hiroshima has rebuilt and all those, that sort of thing, They always had a wonderful rail system, of course, Japan, and they were very good even when we were over there, But, they rebuild and so forth. Of course, there wouldn't be any unions to worry about when they were building over there, like Germany and Japan are the two losers who gain more, I think, than after the war than in the actual poor old UK and so forth had to rebuild themselves and so forth. But Germany and Japan have really, been fostered greater did better than anybody else. Like the losing sides won out at the finish, We have reunions, you see, Vikoff reunions, and we had in New South Wales, we would have 2 reunions a year, one in Junee and one in Corowa, or one in one other place anyway, but Junee and Corowa were the main 2, and every 6 months we'd have a reunion. So we kept in touch pretty well in lots of cases. They were great reunions, to meet up again. You hadn't seen them for 12 months or so. Yeah, so that was one of the things we're missing now. Fortunately, in Japan, if you're in certain areas where, if you're close to where the bombs went off, there'd be a case, and they're still in the air, all that. And I have a couple of fellas. One came back and was in Corowa, and we used to meet and have a drink occasionally. And he passed away through the fact that he was affected by that. And there wasn't a great deal of help at that stage for him. And I can remember the last time we had a get-together, and he said that he was given a little bit of help. It was possibly too late, I think. And I think I may have been up here in the UK on another holiday, and I went back and rang to see how he was, and he was gone. So it was sad, and the fact that they were starting to realise that, you're affected a bit later on in life rather than just after it happens, And I would say there's been quite a number of Japan veterans would have been affected in the certain areas they were in, So, it wasn't all, bread and honey, but that's how life was over there. But no, I was one of the lucky ones that came home without any worries. But yeah, and you feel for families that, because they weren't that old. When you think about when we went over there, you see, and there'd be only in the ones that would be affected, possibly only in their 30s and 40s, 50s, and it's just too young to die, too young to go. But I don't know whether what we can do or what happens when there's not enough help given, and not quickly realising that something should have been done for these people straight away, and left, come home and find out that they're, I think that perhaps everyone that went to Japan should have been examined and so forth when they come out. Well, that wasn't done, So I think perhaps that was the cause that may have lost a few lives that shouldn't have been lost, A lot of the fellas were a bit older than I was, and they're gone now and so forth. And I've got one mate left in Brisbane at Victoria Point, Bruce Robertson. Keep in touch, and I lost my best mate earlier this year, last year. He was at Coffs Harbour. Yeah. So, I don't know just how many will be left in the years gone by, but the reunions are not quite as satisfactory or not the same again. You haven't got the faces that you used to see and so forth. Yeah. Yeah, well, I've been a member of the RSL for over 50 years. It's strangely, because we weren't in combat, we were treated a little bit like the Vietnam War. You go back, and they didn't want to accept us as soldiers or returned men, and it wasn't until they start finding that the First World fellas were dying out and they needed this RSL to keep going, and they opened their books a bit and begging us to come back. And now I am a member of the sub-branch, which do a great job. We pick in welfare, particularly for wives or husbands that are not well or in that sort of thing. And we have 2 meetings a month. I'm on the committee as well, and we make sure that that's looked after. Everything's looked after in that regard, and the RSL is mainly outsiders, not even returned men that run the RSL. It's a big deal at the RSL in Corowa. It's the main place and it's right in the middle of the town, and it's very popular, and they cater very well, for all functions and what have you, So that's good that the sub-branch is uniting with the RSL, and they're getting along quite well together. Whereas a few years ago, when outsiders were coming in and taking on the RSL, and the sub-branch was kind of partly forgotten, pushed aside a little bit, So it's come back to a much better situation now, and everybody seems to be quite happy the way things are going there. Yeah. The churches come together and they wanted to do something, and a couple of one of the churches went down around in that area, which they heard about. You can bring people out of the city, out to the country, and usually around about March, the long weekend in March, we bring them up, and they'd be 50 or 60 with families as well. It's just called Who Was Your Neighbour? And they would come by train to Trace or Wangaratta, and we'd collect them by bus, and we'd bring them back, and then we'd billet them over the weekend. And then we were helped once we start organising these. The people of the town got behind us as well as the churches, and donated things and volunteered to help out and so forth. It was a very successful weekend, and those poor devils, they just loved it. We took them out to the farms, and we took them here and took them there, and fit as much as we could in that weekend, and they couldn't believe that, they're so good. And we build them. I had no trouble. I used to have 3 or 4 stay with me, and I only have to be worried about breakfast, you know. And of course, some of them had their ideas of cooking and what have you and so forth, of course. And I'd eat with their hands instead of I just walk out and leave them to it. So but it was, you know, well worthwhile, and you know, we got, and we were, even the council, the shire, and that, everybody got behind us, and it was, you know, we're looking forward to try and do a little bit more now, and trying to get some of these people employed in the country in certain areas. We've had a little bit of luck in 1 or 2 occasions. So we were a bit halted last year because of the virus, because of the pandemic, but we have meetings every month just to keep in touch, and once we get going again, well, hopefully we can do a bit more for them. ANZAC Day is a big occasion with me. I really look forward to it, and the work that's done by the sub-branch to bring it to its fore, it's wonderful, really. As you say, even though we didn't have ANZAC Day last year, it's surprising what was done in a small town of Corowa, around every street and so forth, that was lit up and out there, you know, and wait for the bugle to be blown, and you know, it touched the heart, really. It was a wonderful effort, really. Yeah. So well, ANZAC Day, it's ANZAC Day and 11th the 11th. It's 2 big occasions in Corowa for the sub branch. We have a big organisation. We can't because of the way the world is today. We can't decorate the monument. We've got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and put everything out and so forth, because we're afraid that if we put it up the night before, it wouldn't be there next day. So that's a sad thing to happen. But that's what we do, and we visit cemeteries after, and the graves of any soldiers and what have you, any service people, and again on the 11th, we do have another big occasion for that day. You know, ANZAC Day, I think it's got stronger. The main reason it's got stronger is that we're bringing more children into the ANZAC Day. All the high school in Corowa have run ANZAC Day the last 3 or 4 years. The speeches and run the whole with the help of the sub branch, and this is bringing more people, their families and everybody coming and so forth, and it's really lifted the ANZAC Day appearance every year. It's got bigger and bigger. So we're very pleased with that. Yeah. I don't think it'll ever die in Corowa anyway. If people can open up and say a few words about themselves, and so instead of keeping too much to themselves and not worry anybody else about them, I think that has been going on too long, and I think it is showing that people are coming out in the open a bit and expressing themselves and saying, well, look, you know, something's got to be done, or I'm not well enough, or I'm not, you know. So I think it's a grand idea. I think it's wonderful if we can get people to open up and let us know, because I've known, you know, diggers that have taken their life and they couldn't cope with civvy life, you know, and that's tragic. I'd love to be able to express myself a bit better in that regard, but the Lawless wars wasn't going to be a war after the First World War, and then the Second World War come along, and now people are just continuing fighting one another for hardly any reason at all, and killing people. It just seems to be observed that it is allowed to go on, but it is, and it seems to be not improving at all. And you can understand the type of war that they're fighting now. It's going to be more people in that suicide mood, because, you know, they wouldn't know just where the enemy was in over these places, you know. So I think it's a great idea if we could do a lot more to help them, really. It is tragic to see people that they're only young when they take their lives. It shouldn't be so. It shouldn't be so. I would say that you sit back and you think a little deeply about life, you know, and you think to yourself, well, a little bit of humility and a little bit of patience, and things come to you that you didn't expect would be, and which you might be able to help some person, one person or two persons, and that spreads and so forth. And I kind of feel that, well, I've tried to have good faith, and I think that I always come to the conclusion at the end that if you're a little bit humble and try to do something worthwhile, that would be a satisfactory thing in my life that I'd be quite happy to finish with, you know. I suppose that, you know, if you have good genes, it is a bit of a help. But then I think that you really got to look after yourself, and maybe if you're a drinker, you cut back on your drinks, like I do. I have done, well, when you're young, of course, you don't think of the future a great deal, but when you get a bit older, you realise just how precious life is, you know. And to do the right thing by yourself, it's not a big deal. But if you're prepared to not sacrifice, but just cut back and do the things that bring you a little bit of happiness, not so much and health-wise, well, I know that I suppose having good parents and a good mother that had a good diet, and I had a good wife that was a very good cook too as well, and now I've got a wonderful family, and everywhere I go I'm treated so well as far as that is concerned. But I think that you've just got to reflect on your life itself, and live. Well, control yourself to know that you're not as young as you used to be. You can't do the things you used to do, but not always easy. But but it's something that I just find myself now as saying that, you know, well, you've got to accept life as it is, and I just don't know how long I'll go on for. I'd love to come up here each year and be here with this in another 6 years' time, but that's not in my hands. But life, I don't know. I feel very, very fortunate to be in the state of health that I am, and to be so well looked after by my family. I think that's the main thing I feel in my life.